Good afternoon. Good evening, perhaps. Welcome to the 2026 Darwin College Lecture Series, which, as you all know, of course, is on the theme of song. You'll have seen from the programme on the screen behind me that we have an exciting series of 8 lectures for you over the next 8 weeks. And as usual, our speakers will cover a whole range of disciplines and topics. But this year, it's with the added bonus that there will be both instrumental and vocal performances. So watch this space and do come and join us for those. It's a really great pleasure to introduce and welcome our first speaker, Hans Slabbekoorn. He's a professor of acoustic, ecology and behaviour at Leiden University. He did his PhD at Leiden. He then went on to do postdoctoral work in San Francisco State University before returning to Leiden, where he is a full professor. He's well-travelled. He's had visiting professorships in France, China, Brazil, Suriname, and probably other places. And his field work has taken him all over the world as well. Over the years, he has worked on plants, primates, birds, fish, marine mammals and invertebrates, and he's currently investigating the effects of noise and light pollution in terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. He's particularly interested in applying the One Health concept to urban ecology, as we will hear, and he's providing fundamental knowledge to ecological impact assessments for offshore wind energy transition, something I know many of us are both interested in and concerned about, there being more of it. He's a dedicated teacher and runs courses at Leiden on behaviour and conservation, trends in behaviour and ecology, urban ecology and evolution, and also a seminar series, curiously or fascinatingly, entitled Human Evolution and Animal Personality. Outside his academic teaching, I'm told, he continues to teach Korean karate and is a third Dan. And I don't know what a third Dan is, but I'm sure I'll hear later on. So please join me. It's a great pleasure to welcome Hans to deliver the first lecture in this 2026 Darwin College Lecture Series entitled Notes and Noises in Nature. Hans.
Thank you very much. Is the mic working? Yes? You can hear me? Nice. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting. Thank you very much, everybody here, for coming. I'm delighted to speak here. Very honored to be here at Darwin College. And I will tell you today about notes and noises in nature. And afterwards, I tell more about the karate for those who want, of course. The full title was actually Notes and Noises in Nature, Not a Swan Song. And so that adds a little bit to the story. I will have a brief introduction and then tell parts about the how and the why, mainly about bird song. And a lot of that can also be found back in this book already more than 20 years ago. I am getting old. Swan song means that, well, you do your last thing and then it's all over. And it's interesting that on the picture, this historical gravure by Reinier van Persijn, it's a mute swan, actually. But swans refer to poets and vocalizing their poem. But I will address the downside of the effects of anthropogenic noise, but hope to also end with the sunny side of it and what I see in terms of future. So on the website it says that I will try to make them, you, shape and sharpen your ears, and that you will go outside this evening as a different person acoustically. So, well, that's a challenge, of course, but I'll try. So I'll have this image coming up, and then hopefully you are willing to sharpen your ears. So let's start with that. Start easy, eh? You can call, what is it? It's a very common species over here, I just heard. But we'll continue, and the questions, they change a little bit. Yeah, here? Donkey? Yeah, it's not a donkey. Big or small, it's all relative in the world. But these are very attractive sounds to female koalas. Friendly or hostile? Friendly? Well, no. I think it depends on who you are and what sex you are. But it is a song. But I just want you to listen and at the same time understand that there's a lot of information in there that can vary what kind of person or animal you are. I have a fourth one. Animal or not? That is a question I am asking myself a lot with recordings that I make. You heard some water, and it is indeed underwater. And this is an animal. It's a fish, and many fish make sounds. But there's also lots of noise underwater, so I will return to that. And this is a drumming drum. It tastes well, but it can also make a lot of noise. And actually some houseboat owners were complaining with the local factory that they thought was doing something weird during the night. But that was the spawning season of the local drums. Okay, back to birds. I spent some time at San Francisco State University with Luis Baptista, then still alive. And he was very interested in music and very interested in birds. And he matched these birds with music in a way that I thought was very inspiring. And he said cross-taxa inspiration, meaning the composer being inspired by the canyon wren, which he was actually unlikely to have ever met. But just to play them back. That's the canyon wren. This is Chopin. For what it is. But Mozart came up with another piece that Meredith West actually found out may actually be an inspiration by birds in a different way. This is the musical joke. Maybe people know that. Short fragment, but it's about those dissonant notes that are very unlike Mozart. And so that has been a puzzle. But Meredith West found out that in those days, in the 18th century, that Mozart had actually a starling pet. And around the dates of this composition, it supposedly died. And she regarded this as in honor of his dead starling, that he made these dissonant notes, as the birds can also make these dissonant notes. Okay, back to sharpening your ears. Now some serious stuff. Wow, serious. There must be bird watchers in the room. What do we hear? Yeah, the beetle lovers may also recognize that. And this. To make you feel easy. Okay, so species identification is of course very important for bird watchers, but for the species themselves as well. I'll make it a little bit more difficult. This is on my walk with my dog in the mornings in the Netherlands. What's that? That's a more difficult one. I have another more difficult one. Somebody? I'll play them once more. Very common. I heard rain. Huh? Okay, so there's more to a species-specific. There are birds of a particular species that do follow some species-specific rules, but that sound differently for some reason. I'll come back to these two examples later on. But that's why you have to sharpen your ears, not just think, okay, it's monitoring. No, there's more to hear and more to learn about when you listen really well. And that brings me to the first, is the how. And I'm excited about this talk next week, so go and listen to this next week. And I was always intrigued by the throat singing because of how is this done? Tuva and Mongolian singers, they have this interesting way in which they produce sounds while singing. And what you see here is a sonogram with time here and the frequency on the y-axis. And what you see is that there's a fundamental frequency and overtones, which are multiples of the fundamental frequency. And it's generated, like I'm doing right now, with our vocal folds over here, and then going through the vocal tract. There's a source, and there's a filter. And during this throat singing, what they do is apparently they have here a place where they can contract the vocal tract, and here, and you get an odd-shaped filter with different air pressures that affects the sound such that these overtones become emphasized in particular areas and not in others, which is not very particular because I'm doing that all the time. I'm pronouncing my sound with my tongue in the oral cavity. But they do this in a beautiful way, and they really squeeze overtones to formants. Next week, more. Because birds, many birds, produce similar sounds. Also, these fundamentals with a ladder of overtones. This is zebrafinch, well studied in laboratories. And how they produce it, they don't have vocal folds, but they have a syrinx. And the syrinx is here situated where the trachea is splitting up into the bronchi. And interestingly, the sound's production can be at the split or actually a little bit lower. And that means that when the sound is produced, it can come from the left and come from the right. These are two different calls altogether, but one is higher and the other one is lower. And as these resonance features of the filter are actually tuned to high or low frequencies, if you have a sound source that is lower or higher in a particular bronchi, then you can also produce better higher and lower frequencies. And that is what birds do. So here you see an interesting study by Rod Sudders. And what he did is he did a recording. Again, you see the time and the frequency and the notes that this brown thresher is producing, but also a flow of air that you see here. And the flow of air is determined by temperature. So he has little thermistors or thermometers in the bronchi, so he knows whether there's a flow of air passing by or not. And what you see is here, on the left side, sometimes there's a lot of air passing or sometimes not. A lot of air, sometimes not. A lot of air, sometimes not. And it's not synchronous completely with the other one. This is the sound. And so the numbers indicate whether it's left or right, and you see this high note only has airflow on the right. And here you see these two, there's overlapping airflow. The gray, there is no sound. Why not? You need to breathe sometimes, so that's the inflow. And so you can see when they are singing and breathing. Interestingly, why is this happening? Sometimes birds have very wide-ranging notes, like this red cardinal. And studies on the mockingbird that are really accurate copying species, they try to copy these cardinal notes. And what you see if you, like Rod Sudders, put in these thermistors in the bronchi of the mockingbird, you see that it's making these notes, and sometimes it's not really doing well enough yet. And juveniles start really awkwardly and have two notes, but over time they become better and better, and they get this very smooth note, which is as you see here, determined, it starts with a high part and then gradually flows over into the low part. So it uses both, and after each note it sings, it breathes in. This is how it sounds. I thought there were more. Yeah. Still only few. I don't know why that was. Okay, so they have the ability to use both sides of the syrinx below in the bronchi to generate these sounds. And that came up in a very recent study from one of my group members, Michelle Spierings here. She has this bird sing-along project, which is about parrots and parrot owners, citizens and science. So she says, well, record your parrot when it does a song that mimics some music, send it up to us. And what we will do is we will analyze it, we will manipulate it, send it back to you, and play it back to your parrot and see whether the parrot can actually mimic the change in frequency or whatever they do to it. And then they report back, and they analyze it, and they publish. So apparently, what came up is that R2-D2 from Star Wars is by far the most popular song that people teach to their parrots. And so they have, I think, about 7 different species now, hundreds of individuals, with this song. And interestingly, this is an artificial, well, for those people that do not know, it's an artificial sound generated by machine. And there's very odd, there's also regular sounds, but also these odd sounds in there, where you have a fluctuation in frequency going up, going down, and at the same time there's one going down and up. So it's a mirror image. Typically, we call that in acoustic terms aliasing, kind of a distortion of your recording. But here they made it, and the robot is making that sound. And if you look at what a starling does in the imitation, looks pretty good. But the budgie and the other parrots, they cannot. They have a very accurate part of one of the sounds, but not of the other. They just have a regular overtone, which is a multiple of this fundamental. Interesting. And how come? Well, here you see the syringes of these 2 species groups. This is the parrot with the sound generating part over here, which is only one part. And here you see it for the starling on the left and on the right, the ability to produce 2 sounds independently and also 2 independent traces of frequency modulation. So I also brought a little movie with that, hope it works. So what you will hear first, and it will be labeled, is the robot sound, and then softer, so sharpen your ears, the imitation of both species. Pretty good. Now the difficult one. And I think at this point, sounds from space, again, in 1 month, you have this other lecture, of course. Okay, so the sound is generated, pretty complex, can be at 2 different places. But is it a whistle or is it a drum? Is it a membrane vibrating or is it a whistle? And a whistle is something that is the sound that is generated by a vortex in the air. So how can we find out whether birds whistle or not? Yeah, who's for whistling? And who's for vibrating membranes? Pooh, most of you are hesitating, I guess. But a third is for one and a third for the other. How can we find out? Already quite a while ago, people thought, if you put them in a helium atmosphere, the sound propagation characteristics of the air change, and if the source of the sound is air-based, that should go up. If it is non-air-based, but in a membrane, then it should stay down. And so, Steve Nowicki did. So here you see 2 sonograms, one in normal air, and other in helium. I should have said helium oxide, because there is some oxygen in there still. I think that otherwise it will not work. But what you see here is that the sound is a fundamental frequency. If there would be no filter in this bird, it would have lots of overtones, but it has a filter continuously. It sings with pure tones. If you put it in a helium atmosphere, you see the fundamental remains unchanged. But there is a very clear overtone visible. So apparently, nothing goes wrong with the source, but something goes wrong with the filtering. Not a whistle, but some sort of membrane. We did the same in Leiden. Here you see notes remain at the same pitch, so no whistle. We did the same with doves, also in a helium and oxygen atmosphere. And what you see is that the coo, there is some significant change also in the filtering, but nothing compared to the actual whistle, a flute that we also played back in the same atmosphere. And then you see there's up to a 40% change in the frequency. So clear proof of the mechanism is not a whistle, but also doves. They vibrate a mechanic source, and that is how they generate sounds. Okay, so we know a lot about how, but the why, and there's a lot of whys, and I'm sure you know also a lot of these. So they communicate, they make sounds, and they can tell stories to females or to males, or there is sound that is generated towards a potential predator of yourself or of X, mobbing. Sometimes you think, there's nobody here of your species, what are you doing? But maybe we don't know yet then. There's begging, of course, there's lots of different contexts. This is a very interesting one that you may or may not know. Skylarks start singing when they're chased by a merlin. And people think, and it has been shown that if they really sing, then the merlin is actually giving up earlier. So they think it is similar to the strutting of gazelles. The bigger they jump, the earlier the predator thinks, whoa, this one is in good shape. So if you start singing while being chased, well, then you must have good lungs and good wings to escape. So lots of different functions. But what is then the information? We already saw species, and we wondered about whether there's information related to friendly or hostile. But could age be in the voice of birds? And I thought, okay, how do I explain this? And I found this picture, and I thought, okay, in humans, we know a lot about that. And then I looked an old paper up, and then I found this curve, and I thought, oh, that is a bit unexpected. I knew I was on my way down, but I didn't know that the way up was still coming, and I'm actually now approaching 60, so I'm on my way up, and I will go, hopefully, up and up and up. So the voice, the fundamental frequency is changing over your lifetime. Of course, you get what we say, the beard in your throat very early on, but you stay down, you go down to the menopause, and then you go up. Is that the same for women? Somebody of age wants to say something? It was completely different. It's completely different. Interesting. So you should see this green line is the same green line over there. So obviously, women have higher frequencies, the fundamental frequency. Apparently, in those days, this is an older paper, women smoked and male didn't. So they have smokers and non-smokers. The pattern is the same, but there is a big impact of smoking, so that lowers your frequencies, but it goes steady up to the menopause, and then you lower, and you go steady again, apparently. The reason why I show this is, okay, there can be information in there, and we actually use it. And the fundamental frequency, a little bit of deformance, but the fundamental frequency is critical, and we are correctly assessing age a lot based on this fundamental frequency. So we have something in the signal that's correlated to the sender, gender, and age, and us receivers perceive that and assess the age. Okay. Do birds do that? Well, begging calls, obviously, and here it must not be a song-like. So here they start singing, and there it's over. Yeah. So I think it's between these two groups. And what you heard is the great hit song. And it's very staccato, stereotypic repetition. And we have a specialist here in the room about that stereotypy of repetition. And that is labeled as song consistency. So if one repetition of this song and the next one is the same or slightly different, and the higher it is, the more consistent it is. And what you see here is a study where they analyze that over age. And what you see that it's parabolic. So it's not that they continue to increase in the song consistency as they have been more experienced and more practiced. But what you see is that the peak in stereotypy, in consistency, is here in the prime of their life, and then they go down. And what you should also see is these small lines are connecting dots. And each dot connected to another is the same measure to an individual in a different year. And that it means that actually they go along with this main curve. So here, all the birds, they increase their song consistency. Here, still the same. Midlife, some of them already go down early, and here they really go down. So there is information in how consistent your song is about your age. So great hits, they sing most consistent in the prime of their life. Interestingly, they have a repertoire of song types. And you may imagine that you start off with a small repertoire, and you can increase your repertoire over time. So there must be a positive correlation, and that is the case. So the older you are, the larger your repertoire. But there's something different to the former graph. If you look at the connecting lines, except for this odd bird, all of them are flatliners. So they remain the same. So we have overall a correlation, but within a bird, it remains the same. And that is largely, this correlation is largely there because it's empty over here. So birds with small repertoires, they don't get very old. Don't know what happened with this one. There's always exceptions, but that means, on the one hand, all the birds have indeed a larger repertoire. So female birds that hear a male bird singing can assume that a bird has lived for long, otherwise it could not have sung so many song types. But repertoire size, if it's a small repertoire, it's a real good predictor for age. And obviously, that may be important for a female to decide whether she chooses that particular male as a mate. Okay, so how do we prove that they actually communicate? I see nodding. What is the proof of communication? Babies. Okay. Yeah. In a broader sense, I think that is right. When I get the answers of my students, I don't think it would be graded as very positively, but anybody else? Response, eh? Yeah, we need a response. And you need evidence, and a response to what? When? How do we get the response? Yeah, playback. So typically, for next time, if I come again, always shout, do an experiment. Because the first answer I would give you is, well, you can do tags. And what this study is, it's already an old one by Hasselquist. Great reed warblers, the males, they come back first from the wintering grounds, start singing in their territorial disputes. And they're there. Some have a large repertoire, some have a small repertoire. And then their repertoire is huge. And then a female comes back. If she hears two birds singing, how can she assess a repertoire that is hundreds of song types big? Well, not in a minute, not in an hour. And actually, she's not doing that. What she does, because they tagged the females, she would spend a couple of days actually in the first territory, move on, spend a couple of days over here, maybe go to a third, and then she goes back to male number 1, 2, or 3, and she always goes back to the one with the largest repertoire. The ones with a lower repertoire, they still get a female. Right? So that is, other males, they do get females. But often they choose another male to mate with. And only neighbors, you understand what happens, only neighbors that have a larger repertoire than their own social companion. And so they choose, it's communication, and I say, yes, it's very compelling, but it's a correlation. It could be correlated with a particular territory size, that they like that territory, and the males with large territories, or with large complex repertoires, they have chosen that particular territory, and the females do the same, and then you have this match. So experiment is what you should do. They've done that with great hits. Here you see great hits in the territory. They caught the great hits. They have recorded their songs, and they play back either great hit song or a control sound, typically another ecologically unimportant bird species that's also around, so it's familiar. And what you see then is that the territory with song is remaining empty. There are no new great hits that are invading this territory, but when there is no song played, there's no real bird present, but the song itself is here enough to keep them away, and here they're entering. Very simple experimental evidence that the song plays this role. So it's a keep-out signal, and repertoire size adds to the vigor and to the efficiency of the song. So larger repertoires do better in keeping animals out. And you can do another one with the other function, female attraction. What they've done is with starlings, they just have nest boxes. There doesn't need to be a bird in there. You just do some playback from the nest box, and you check whether females are actually interested and sitting in front of this nest box. And so here you see a long and complex song played back, or a short and simple, and they just spend more time with that long and complex one. So they love that. Okay, I think time to show this poster, because it's only about males and male song, and is that the world? Hearing her voice is about attention that we should have paid then and now to the other sex. And in birds, it has happened the same. So this is Catharina Riebel, a colleague in Leiden as well, and she has this review paper, and she addresses this historic and geographical bias in male song. Just be interested in the male song and the females that listen and are interested in that. And she says, okay, yeah, we are in the temperate zones of the Americas and Europe, where all these studies on bird song have taken place, are really biased. There are females that sing here, but only for very few species. The robin is one of the most well known for that. In the winter time, that males and females actually split up and have their own territories and sing against each other. And in the spring, the female gives up her song again and then merges into the male territory again. But she says it's interesting for several reasons to look at these females. And one thing is because song learning, birds learn their song. And I brought these examples, which are examples of original recordings by William Thorpe, a long time ago, and they're archived by the British Library in London. And they're chaffinches, and they show you how they vary among individuals and how they learn their song. So here you see one example. And this is another one. So they have the chaffinch-specific syllables with simple ones repeated and this unrepeated flourish at the end. And now you see a chaffinch that has never heard another chaffinch in its life. It's an isolated finch. And what you immediately see now, because you're now educated in terms of overtones, the filter apparently does not wrong. This is not in helium. This is an experience in terms of hearing other chaffinch singing. And it sounds like this. Very squeaky. There is some chaffinch sequence in there, but not a very attractive one, I believe, for female chaffinches. And this one that you've heard before was actually a chaffinch that had never heard a chaffinch, but had heard a meadow pipit. So it does copy meadow pipit song notes. It's able to do that. If it would have heard a chaffinch and a meadow pipit, it would sound completely as a chaffinch. There is apparently something, it's always a combination of genetic and cultural aspects. It's never one or the other, it's always a combination. So this is the one that you heard before. And what's important is that if you have a preference for a particular song type, may it be between species or variation among individuals of your species, you can only do that if you also have learned those traits. So you learn to sing, but you also learn to recognize and discriminate. So in that sense, females are equally valid to investigate. And if you go beyond our limited geographic range, that's what Katarina did with Karen Odom. And they looked at all species for which we know that females or males sing. And here, every dot is a species, and you see a big phylogenetic tree, and in red is where female song is present. And blue, where it's really known to be absent. So the vast majority of all species worldwide is actually having male and female song. So it's widespread, and if you do an ancestry analysis, then it's the ancestral trait that both male and females are participating in the singing. And they just recently had a follow-up where they really looked at the ecological features correlated to this. So it can be completely absent female song in yellow, or that they have similar presence in vocal presence in life. And what you see is that territoriality is a very important explanatory factor. So if there's year-round territoriality, then females do a lot of the singing. And obviously in our temperate zones, lots of migratory species, short territorial periods, then there is less so. Then the females do hardly anything of the singing. And also biparental care, also related to tropical regions, has an impact on whether or not females are singing. So there's a lot to say about female song as well, and we should pay attention to whether what we hear is actually a male, and how do we know? Many birds look very much the same on the outside, but acoustically, if you tune your ears, you may hear more about that. Okay, moving on. It's all well familiar to us and not so nice. But actually, in the urban environment, we have quite a lot of birds, and actually several bird species seem to like it very much, and actually you see them more in urban environments than in other environments. So does that mean that the noise is doing them any harm? It does. There is quite some insight now. Here you see territories or areas in Canada, and there are studies also from the US, where natural areas have a lot of gas extraction stations. And these gas extraction stations have either gas under pressure or no pressure underground. And that means that sometimes there's a noisy generator, and sometimes there's not. And there's a huge amount of replication. And they investigated, for example, here for the ovenbirds, whether singing males attract a female. And in the noisy areas, they do so much less. And I hear you thinking, it's a correlation, I hope. But there's more. What we did our own study on the highway towards Germany in the Netherlands, and we looked at gray-tit data of long-term data. And also there what we found is independent actually from the distance from the road, the noise levels at the nest box were explaining the clutch size as well as the weight of when the fledglings left the nest. And so in the noisy areas, less birds that have less chance to survive than in the more quiet areas. So there is an impact. And we looked at their songs. What you see here is a 4-note song that is repeated very consistently. And this is one that is relatively quiet territory. And you see the lower frequencies is about 3 kilohertz. And this is an example from nearby. A 2-note song type, repeated, and it has a much higher minimum frequency. And you also see here that that's the noise of typical traffic. So low frequencies, and the higher it gets, the louder it gets, you also see at higher frequencies. So it's overlapping partly, and especially with the lower notes of the song types. And we looked at territories of different noise level that are all within the same population, and you look at the minimum frequency, and what you see then is that in the most quiet territories, they sing the lowest songs, and in the more noisy territories, they sing higher songs. So that was a correlation within a population. So great hits sing higher in more noisy areas. And we found more things, so I went to lots of areas. One area was London, and I recorded this bird. A single song type, a single note song type, which is quite odd. And in Rotterdam, remember the odd one that you didn't recognize immediately as a great hit? A 14-note song type that is repeated in a great hit style, but yeah, what is it? Maybe it copied something else. I visited this guy repeatedly, and so it also was successfully in getting the babies that year. What's happened here, Salvino? Is it a blue tit-like copy or so? I think so, huh? But this is an urban bird, and in the urban birds we found lots of single song types, of many note song types, whereas regular in the forest you have 2 or 3 notes in the song type that is repeated, and that is most common. And these odd ones, you get them in urban areas. We recorded also in Paris, across all the cities in major cities in Europe, and there are 2 territories actually on both sides of the Eiffel Tower. And I went to forests nearby, so this is Fontainebleau. And what you see here is the population average. This is actually Amsterdam and the Lage Vuursche, the forest in the Netherlands. And you see that each time the urban population is singing higher than the forest population. There is variation geographically, and that probably has to do with an overall variation in the size of the individual. Bigger birds with lower frequencies. So I guess the Amsterdam, I don't know what they eat in Amsterdam, but they are the fattest. If you go more to the Scandinavian region, I think they are even bigger. But it's very consistent. And so great tits sing higher in more noisy cities. But obviously, it's all correlational. And I told my student at the time, Wouter Halfwerk, we have to do an experiment to really show that it's the noise that affects them. So he went up to a great hit in a quiet territory that was singing, and he took his highway and played it back to the bird, and then checked what happened. And that was very interesting. What you see here is the low note frequency on the y-axis, and how long that song type was sung when there was noise present. And what you see is that if it sings a low, particularly low frequency, it stops singing that song type very soon. And if it sings a high frequency, it continues with that. It's less masked by the noise, and it continues for longer to use that. So it's not that a particular song type is moved up in frequency. No, it just picks another song type from its repertoire and thereby sings higher. So, behavioral mechanism for this frequency shift that has been repeated in lots of urban species now around the world. So they sing for longer these high frequency songs when there is low frequency traffic noise. Quite recently, Dan Menel said, he contacted me and he said, I want to go to Paris and record your same great hits 20 years later. Because in Paris, they decided that noise may be bad for the bird, not for the bird, for humans. And thereby birds may profit. And what he shows here, he had noise level data for Paris, And in several neighborhoods, they reduced the amount of cars and the amount of noise sources, and you see really that there is something going on here. My study was already much earlier, but you can assume that obviously it was at that level. And there is really a significant reduction in those neighborhoods. So Dan went to all my places. He reanalyzed my old recordings together with, and compared them to the new recordings. And what you see here is the ones from Paris in the purple and the ones from Fontainebleau, that nearby forest. And what you see is that there are no loud territories in Fontainebleau, so there is more over here. And you see that there is a shift in frequency in the urban areas. They still sing higher, despite the noise reduction. But what you also see is what I actually would have expected is that the difference would be in the bottom part, because there is the noise. But they still sing those low frequency song types. In the upper part is the difference. So these forest birds, they don't sing those high frequency song types that are sung in the urban area, which is interesting because I wrote this conceptual paper quite a while ago already. And there I suggested, well, if you have a population with 2 individuals here, 2 individuals there, that they actually have a repertoire both of particular song types of particular frequency, and there is a lot of noise, then they may still have the same repertoire, but they may not sing those song types anymore because it's noisy. So then you don't need a difference because we know it's behavioral flexibility. We have shown that with the experiment. But then, of course, the next generation may learn what they hear only and produce what they have learned. And thereby you get maybe, everywhere you get new song types that are copied, but here they may only copy song types that are audible and are high frequency. So you may get only that part of the range. And then new song types may arise, and there may be mistakes, but they are mistakes in the frequency region where they try. And so here, there would be no specific bias, but here there may be a bias, and they may even make mistakes that make them move towards higher frequencies. And that is something that you could call cultural evolution. And what we found out with this Paris paper is that you actually move up, but they still can do their low frequency sounds. And in the city, it's not noisy all day long, of course. And there may be a reason why they still want to keep those sexy song types. Okay, last bit on the noise and on the downside. Together with Salvino de Kort, who is here in the front row, and study at Manchester Airport and Amsterdam Airport. And we have shown all over the world a positive correlation between, well, positive, more noisy means higher frequency songs. They escape. Salvino students went to Manchester Airport. Here you see where the planes fly. Here you see territories, in this case of the chiff-chaff, and the sound levels in those territories. Every 3 minutes, there are birds that are exposed to 100 decibel. That will make us deaf, and we believe that may also make birds deaf. And what he found in a control area far away or further away out of the noisy area, the positive correlation that we found for other species in other urban areas. So from relatively quiet to more noisy. And the orange are from Manchester Airport area, and there's the opposite. I said, Salvino, can't be true. I go to Schiphol, and there I'll find exactly the same. They do the same. And so we didn't know why, but we thought one thing may be if they get deaf because of the sounds, then we believe they get deaf, especially in the higher frequencies. And if they don't hear themselves what they sing, or if they don't get a response by nearby deaf birds in the higher frequencies, but only for the lower frequencies, that may be a mechanism by which they actually move in their frequency use. And he did playbacks to check whether they heard. Well, they heard. And what you see here is that in the control area, he played back songs of their own population or from the airport in this case. They respond stronger to local songs than to other songs. And the same is true at the airport, but there's a big difference. At the airport, these birds were much more aggressive. Maybe because they're partially deaf, can't rely on the communication. Maybe they're irritated by the noise and agitated. We don't know, but there is a serious difference. In 25 out of 33 cases, the chiff-chaff really landed on the speaker and was pecking on the speaker, and that's the most aggressive stage that we get them in. So big changes in the songs, in the territoriality. So are we all going down the Swan song? No, I don't think so, because, yeah, why? Well, first of all, if you look at cities, if there was first habitat and then there is a city, the process of urbanization, definitely that leads to changes. Here you have 3 species, there you have 3 species. What happens typically if it's urbanized, species drop out, they're gone. But there are also species that show up. Typically the same species. But you end up with 3 species here, 3 species. There is actually no change in the biodiversity. And sometimes it may even increase. So urban habitat is actually quite liked by a species community. But what's important is that bird diversity remains, but it may be in a large part of the area. In many cities, you get the very same biodiversity. So at larger scale, you lose species. So that's important to realize. And obviously, there is effect of traffic noise. And it may apply to Europe, it may apply to South America. I brought this example of Barbosa et al. In Sao Paulo. What you see here is the resident species richness, and for migratory species, they showed very similar patterns. Tree cover, more trees, more species. Noise level, more noise, less species. Distance to water, further away, less species. So it's not just noise, but noise has an impact. But there are more factors, very predictable factors. If you manipulate them as person, as people, as in urban planning, you will get more or less species. And it's important to realize, this is my daughter, she is now 21. But that is just to show you that we live together with foxes, and this was a stuffed one, but she was definitely not afraid. But we, of course, live in the same environment as these birds. And sometimes this environment looks like this, sometimes like this. And what is healthy for us is healthy for people. That means, if you look at this graph again, and you look at the tree cover, we know that in many places of the world it becomes a real problem. And this is the urban heat effect. If there are trees, or no trees, that can, now here it's 5-6 degrees, but it can go up to 12 degrees difference. And even a park in the middle of the city will significantly drop the average temperature, which will make you feel more comfortable. But if you're already threatened by some other pollutants or by older age, that really makes a difference in the really pollution-related deaths. So it's a significant health risk and a significant impact on our lives. Who should worry about number of species of birds if you know this? But it's the same factor. If you look at the noise level, the World Health Organization repeatedly puts out these reports that noise levels are really detrimental to people. So traffic noise accounts for over 1 million healthy years of life lost annually to ill health, disability, or early death. Death by sound? What is that? Well, you can think of annoyance, especially sleep disturbance. People sleep less well. Then if you have other problems, that will turn out to be much more detrimental to you because of it. Heart attacks correlated to noise levels, learning disabilities, and also tinnitus, hearing-related problems. So we know what's bad for the birds is bad for us. And the last one, distance to water, yeah. Obvious, the urban green and the urban blue, there are more and more studies. This one is from the Lancet. It really shows that it improves public health. Physical and mental well-being is affected by whether or not you have access to urban green and urban blue. And it's even more potent if you know that there is this diversity around. So a park with only a single tree is less potent than with many different trees. And I think that is what I want to promote, is that I think that's the way out. I mean, I don't need to convince, hopefully you, because you are all nature-minded. And there is also a group of people, I will not, but in the middle, there's a lot of people that need to vote in a particular way, or that need to be willing to pay for nature And I think the urban diversity is very important, because those are not people that go on hikes, that are not people that go bird watching, but they should be convinced. And I think if you convince them that biodiversity is affected by the same environment as our own health, and that there are socio-economic consequences of not taking care, then I think we can do. And birds are particularly handy and interesting as a tool to convince these people. I think they are persistent. We have high bird diversity in the cities, exactly where the people are that we need to convince. They're manageable. Manipulate the habitat and you get birds back. Not the rare ones that we lost, but the ones that respond to these urban habitats. Songs are attractive and they are accessible. Nowadays, with an app, they know what species. And they're surprised by, whoa, another species. And you can get these automatic recording systems that during the day, as we speak now, you can hear whether there's a bird or an owl vocally active at your house. And a lot of people that do games or whatever they are interested in will maybe also like this. So I think the link to the one environmental health is clear. And I think that may help us, good-willing people, and are willing to save the environment, save our own health, but also that of animals, can increase awareness and appraisal for the biodiversity. And by that, you don't need to pull them out to where they don't want to go, these people, but you can transfer the knowledge and the insight and the awareness, the appraisal for urban biodiversity towards the diversity outside of cities and across the globe. So I think it's up to you. Shall I turn this on for another half hour? Or not? We can do better. These are existing examples. I feel this is better, isn't it? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hans. That was wonderful. As many of you know, I love birdsong, and I'm delighted to say that more and more Darwinian students are becoming keen on listening to birds in our Darwin garden, especially using the app Merlin. But what I think you've demonstrated, to me at least, today is not only how songs from the natural world and acoustic ecology actually contribute to our understanding of acoustic diversity much more widely, but also its implications and its value in terms of addressing environmental issues like biodiversity loss and climate change. So thank you very much. Please join me again in saying an enormous thanks to Hans. What a great way to start the Darwin Lectures. Next week we have the social anthropologist, as you've seen from Hans's slides, Dr. Carol Pegg, talking about Mongolian throat singing. So please join us again. Thank you.